People don't mind a bit of talk. In fact, they welcome it, but they all want to see some action. So to join me now and discuss this issue and others this week, we have a couple of senators, one from either side of the political divide. Joining us from Perth is Senator Matthias Cormann, the Liberal Senator and Assistant Shadow Treasurer.
Good morning, Chris.
And joining me in the studio is Labor Senator Matt Thistlethwaite. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Morning, Chris.
Matt, do you think it helped the government to have these forums this week to be actually talking about serious issues like taxation reform and creating jobs in the manufacturing sector?
I do. It's often a criticism levelled of governments that they don't consult enough with business groups, with unions and the wider community. That's not a criticism that I think can be levelled at the Gillard government. We've proven this week that we are a consultative government, that we need to keep a good thermometer on what's going on in terms of our revenue stream and our outlays, and that's what the focus of the tax forum was. It was also the focus of the jobs forum later in the week, looking at ways we can ensure that we're supporting manufacturing and that there's a pipeline of investment and jobs growth in the economy.
Not a bit late though. You've been in government for 4 years. You don't think you should have had these forums earlier and actually come up with some policy solutions by now?
Not at all. We've had a process of ongoing tax reform under the Labor government. There was the Henry Tax Review. A number of those recommendations have been picked up. The Minerals Resource Rent Tax was one of those. Of course, there's the Carbon Pricing Scheme, which is going to raise revenue associated with transitioning our economy to a clean energy future, for providing protection for households and assistance for business to make that transition. We are a government that is getting on with the job and that is constantly looking at ways to reform our economy and improve our taxation and transfer system.
Matthias Cormann, the opposition didn't even turn up at this forum. You thought it was nothing more than a gabfest.
Well, we weren't invited, and of course we know that Labor is not serious about tax reform. Under Labor over the last 4 years we've had 19 new or increased taxes. Matt just mentioned the mining tax and the carbon tax. I mean, the mining tax is the only thing that really came out of the Henry Tax Review, something that was supposed to deliver a simpler, fairer tax system, ended up with a massive multi-billion-dollar new tax which is manifestly more complex and less fair. And of course the tax forum earlier this week, where Wines wanted to be dragged kicking and screaming by the independents into holding this tax forum, all we got out of that was a recommendation to set up another committee. So from our point of view it was all talk and no action, and the reason we weren't there is because we weren't invited.
Business groups and industry groups seem to be a bit more positive than that, Senator Cormann. They seem to think that this was actually some sort of step forward towards some sort of long-term tax reform agenda. Surely the opposition should have been part of that.
Well, we weren't invited, as I say.
That's debatable.
Well, I don't think that's debatable at all. That's a matter of historical record. We were not invited. But, the coalition has a very strong track record when it comes to, firstly, putting the budget back into surplus, paying off Labor debt, and of course, on the basis of that, delivering tax cuts and delivering genuine tax reform. We have done it before, and of course, we will do that again in the future. If you compare and contrast our record with the record of the Labor government over the last 4 years, I think, everybody knows very well who has got the better track record on tax reform.
Well, we're going to go to a break in a moment, and we'll continue this discussion about tax reform when we come back, because I want to show you exactly how difficult it is to get a serious discussion about tax reform up in this country. And also, we're going to have a look at Kevin 11, the imminent return of Kevin Rudd.
If the hassle of admin is stopping you from hiring and training your apprentice or trainee, then let MEGT look after everything for you. From hiring to managing to handling the administration, MEGT makes apprenticeships, traineeships and training easy for you. To find your local MEGT office, visit meg.com.au today.
I wasn't born to be a footballer. I wasn't born to win a major. And I wasn't born to wear the baggy green for Australia. But I'll bet on any sport because I was born a Waterhouse. With 4 generations of betting knowledge in my blood, I was born to bet. Bet online with me at tomwaterhouse.com and let the knowledge increase your betting IQ. Any sport, any bet type, anytime. Join me now, tomwaterhouse.com.
faster is better when it comes to fighting breakouts. So Clearasil Science developed a fast-acting wash that helps unblock pores. Clearasil 12-hour rapid action wash works to give you visibly clearer skin fast. So in as little as 12 hours, you'll look and feel awesome. Also try new Clearasil Overnight Scrub, scientifically formulated to help visibly reduce redness and pimple size while you sleep. Clearasil, the science of looking awesome.
There's a feeling of belonging out here. I'm Daniel Hill, and this is my story. One of the reasons why I chose chemical engineering was because there's a broad range of things you could do. Oil and gas, mining.
He joined ERA originally as a project metallurgist. His potential is to be a leader in this industry.
I've known Daniel now for probably 14 years or so. Whatever he decides to do, he's really good at, and football's no different.
I couldn't believe how big the MCG was when I first went there.
We use football as a carrot to get young Indigenous males back into school.
I don't want my achievements to be glorified because of my Indigenous background. I want to be, yeah, that guy's good.
Daniel, my son, chemical engineer. I think he has a strong connection to this land here, and he will always come back.
Yeah, they'd let me go. They'd know I'll come back sooner or later.
Proton cars have drive-away deals right across the entire range. The S16 from only $11,990 drive away, now with a free upgrade to the 1.6 GX manual. Gen 2 from $15,990 drive away, and Jumbo from $14,990 drive away. Every Proton car comes standard with Lotus ride and handling, making Proton cars actively safer. Hurry, these deals will not last. Contact your local Proton dealer or visit proton.com.au.
Welcome back to Saturday Agenda. I'm Chris Kenny. We've been talking about tax reform and the Tax Reform Forum that was held in Parliament House, Canberra this week. I want to just show you a few snippets that actually demonstrate why it's so difficult to have a serious debate about tax reform in this country. Now, while the forum was going on in Canberra this week, little known, I suppose, Liberal backbencher from South Australia, Jamie Briggs, phoned in to his regular ABC radio spot in South Australia, and this is what he had to say about GST tax reform.
It strikes me as strange that a State Treasurer wouldn't be arguing when the Commonwealth Government's trying to put pressure on them to reduce ineffective taxes. The states do have a lot of ineffective taxes. Stamp duty is probably the most ineffective of the lot. That they wouldn't be arguing, or at least proposing, that we look at extending the stretch of the GST.
Now, that's Liberal backbencher Jamie Briggs stating what is actually the obvious on tax reform. That is, if you want to get rid of a whole lot of little annoying and inefficient state taxes, you should at least look at extending the base or the rate of the GST. Now, everybody in Parliament knows that to be the case. Everybody knows that that needs to be seriously addressed at some stage. So here's what Treasurer Wayne Swan had to say in response to Jamie Briggs.
I noticed today there's been a call from a prominent Liberal MP to extend the GST to items like food. Let me make it really clear, the government absolutely rejects any attempt to increase the rate or the base of the GST, because that would make life really difficult for many working families. So I think Mr Abbott today ought to indicate whether he supports that move from Jamie Briggs, a prominent Liberal backbencher, or not. He ought to make it really clear what the attitude of the Liberal Party is.
So the Labor Treasurer slaps down a Liberal backbencher. That's what you'd expect, to go straight into sort of a GST scare campaign, I suppose you'd call it. So let's see what Jamie Briggs' Liberal leader, Tony Abbott, had to say about this.
It's just a view from a backbencher. It's not our policy. We have no intention whatsoever of making any change in this area. In this particular area, the government and the opposition are in absolute lockstep.
There you go, the government and the opposition in lockstep. They don't want to talk about the GST. They don't want to raise that prospect, even though what Jamie Briggs said is so obvious and all MPs in Parliament know it's true. Matt Thistlethwaite, that just shows that we can't have a serious debate about tax reform in this country, doesn't it?
Not at all. I think it highlights the fundamental differences in philosophy between the Labor Party and the Liberal Party when it comes to taxation. Jamie Briggs spilled the beans. There are a number of Liberal MPs and senators who believe that we should extend the reach of the GST to food. That's not the philosophy of the Labor Party, because that impact would be on low to middle income earners. Our view is that at a time when the resources sector is doing well, they should be contributing to the revenue base, and we should be using that funding through a minerals resource rent tax to fund increases in superannuation and infrastructure. It highlights the differences in philosophy between the parties.
You aspire in the long term to get rid of these annoying state stamp duties that are actually a disincentive for people to spend money on new homes and the like. You want to get rid of things like payroll tax. You know that the GST needs to be part of that discussion because all the GST money goes to the states. You won't even allow people to discuss it. I'm not saying adopt it. Surely you need to discuss these issues, not rule them out.
Well, there was a discussion about removing inefficient taxes during the process of the taxation forum, and I welcome the comments of some of the state treasurers who have agreed to enter into some discussions and negotiations around uniform approaches to property taxes throughout the country. I think that's a demonstration that we are moving forward when it comes to looking at inefficient taxes, but again, I highlight the difference in philosophy between Labor and Liberal on this issue.
Matthias Cormann, when John Howard brought in the GST, he wanted it to apply across all food, so it would be an efficient tax across everything. It only got exempted from the tax food and a few other items because of the intervention of the Democrats in the Senate. Surely you and the rest of the opposition are mature enough to actually debate these issues to see whether or not it is worth looking at either the rate or the base of the GST to get rid of other inefficient taxes. Why can't you even have a serious open debate about this?
Chris, our policy is not to increase the rate or the base of the GST, but let's be fair to Jamie Briggs. He wasn't actually advocating for that either. Fundamentally, the point that Jamie was making, and which is a quite accurate point, is that if you want to talk about getting rid of inefficient state taxes, you've got to somehow work through, obviously, the state financial implications of that. And the Henry Tax Review, for example, recommended the introduction of a national profit-based minerals resource rent tax to replace state and territory royalties, to replace them. But of course, he also recommended that the federal government should engage in active discussions with state and territory governments to work through the federal-state financial relations implications of that, something the government never did. So the point, fundamentally, the only way you can have tax reform is if there is active engagement between the federal government and the state governments around the federal-state financial relations implications of that. That is a very important point.
I'm going to leave the topic there, Senator Cormann, because it's clear that neither party even wants to talk about the GST. It looks like the GST is stuck in concrete for the rest of time because no one is brave enough to talk about it. We're going to leave tax reform now and just go have a look at the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who's been out and about and very prominent this week. Here's what he had to say yesterday, reacting to suggestions from former Labor Minister Graham Richardson and Sky News host, of course, Graham Richardson, Sky political commentator, suggesting that Kevin Rudd is on the comeback trail.
You mentioned Mr Richardson. Without going to anything that he said, because I really haven't read it, but there's just an observation or two that you might make, which is you know, there's a thing in politics called relevance deprivation syndrome. Is Mr Richardson suffering from that? Probably. Is Mr Richardson taking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year at the moment in salaries to go out there and bag the Labor Party and Labor government every day? Probably. In fact, definitely. Is Mr Richardson doing as he's always done in the past and act as some sort of unofficial spokesman for the factional bullies in our party who try to control it from time to time? Undoubtedly. But that's a matter for Mr Richardson. As to his particular observations about me, water off a duck's back.
Matthias Cormann, very quickly, that looks like Kevin Rudd is on the warpath.
Well, I mean, we've got a divided, directionless government, deeply divided. We've got a Prime Minister who has to look over her shoulder on a constant basis these days, which of course stops her from running the government. I mean, this is just an ongoing saga now, which is a complete destruction. I mean, there's all these challenges to be taken on for the country, and we've got a government that is completely distracted and divided.
Senator Thistlethwaite, have Kevin Rudd's people been in contact with you?
No, they haven't. and there are no moves on for a leadership change.
Mr Rudd's now in open warfare with former Labor ministers about factional control of the party and whether or not there's a leadership spill on the way.
Well, I dispute that. Julia Gillard is our leader. She will lead us to the next election. She's the best person for that job. We've got a very big reform agenda, and reform is difficult. Reform is tough.
How long can this sort of tension go on before something happens to resolve it?
Well, Julia Gillard will lead us to the next election, and I'm confident that once we finish this year...
used to say that in June 2010 about Kevin Rudd too.
Well, I'm confident that once we get through this year, that we pass this legislation, this difficult legislation that's in the Parliament, the Minerals Resource Rent Tax, the carbon pricing legislation, then we will begin to focus on the issues that really will affect Australians, and that's the $70 billion black hole in the opposition's costings.
Thanks for your time, Senator Thistlethwaite, and also in Perth, thank you to Senator Cormann. There is no doubt that Kevin Rudd's name will be discussed many, many more times in the coming week. I'll see you next week.